C-Tag Studios proudly presents the Almost Daily ZenCast. I'm your host, fictional character and nom de plume, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Today's episode kind of doesn't have a title. Or I kept changing my mind, and now can't remember which one I wrote down. But it's episode 7 of our first season, my first season, this first season of me rambling at you over the internet. And I thought I'd take an episode to pause and sort of zoom back. And I guess maybe restate the theme of what I humbly propose to you is the cause at the calling us as a species right now, which is the theme of this podcast. As much as I want to be entertaining and funny and simultaneously avoid hubris and greed, I'd like to inspire and invoke the concept of inspiration to anyone out there listening, because I think that the times are a-changin', as the saying goes, and the history that we're living through is strange and bizarre and difficult and traumatic and spiritually painful, to say the least. So today's episode, I thought I would dip into a little bit of my backstory as a way to sort of reintroduce the general theme of what the podcast is about. Just to catch people up, anybody who's joining late. And also maybe to hopefully address some curiosities or potential questions anybody that has been diligently listening so far to every episode, but still isn't really sure what's going on. The Incorrigible Mr. Zeppo is a character, sort of an iconic, multifaceted character that I have been developing for a long time, and that is intended to be sort of the anchor in a line of science fiction, action, adventure novels that have a bit of spiritual satire, as it were. One could say that I would be deeply influenced by both Stephen King and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy author, whose name currently just completely escaped me. But I'm sure it will drop back into my collective consciousness in just a second. At any rate, so that's sort of my main ambitious, because I'm going very slowly, commercial project. Everyone's got that American dream of, I'm going to make this thing and it's going to make my fortune. Because that's sort of the way America is framed. The American dream is framed as you come here, you work hard, you come up with something original that everyone else is going to love and wish they'd come up with but didn't, and they're going to give you some of their money for having come up with it. And this book series is horribly behind schedule in terms of my own attempt to project out what time I might possibly be done with the first or one of the early books out of the series. I'm sort of writing them completely in no order, so I just keep rotating through each title. And I know that there's an organization, but because all the ideas sort of come at me concurrently, I work on whichever idea feels very strong at a particular time and develop that nugget as far as I can. Anyways, let me give you the scoop on the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Now, I'm not claiming any of this as happening in real life. The following is complete and total fiction. For those who are not clear, I'm describing to you the character that I'm trying to generate sort of a brand around that I hope one day will be a franchise and be turned into movies, into comic books, etc., etc. He loses his parents so young that he can't even have an actual memory of them, and is raised under the tutelage of a very unusual staff employed by a very wealthy oligarch. So, in his young adulthood, he sort of lives through a retelling of the very first portion of Buddha's, sort of slow awakening from society, not from his humanity, not slow awakening from into enlightenment, but the awakening out of societal norms, which is the first portion of Buddha's story, where he encounters people suffering for various reasons and then asks questions of his teachers and gets answers that do not satisfy him. In short, the character goes from being sort of an action spoof comedy of characters along the vein of the Venture Brothers or Johnny Quest, people who are just wealthy enough to go have adventures in foreign countries and casually rescue people from strange dilemmas, and give them gifts of what it is that might correct their injustice in their local exotic location where they live, in whatever community they live in. So that kind of thing. And then he has a slow existential crisis, and instead of waking up from that or elevating himself out of the existential crisis into the light side, he sort of dabbles in the dark side. Under the colors of, or under the flag of, I'm going to use the system against the system in order to gain some kind of leverage on the system. Like the way a porn actor might be, theoretically speaking, a person who's never done porn might go, I'm going to do porn to make X amount of money until I can produce my own something else kind of work, kind of art, kind of product. And then I'll transition to that, and I'll be out of porn, and I won't ever do it anymore. And it'll just be a step along the way to help, because it pays so well, or it used to anyways. But that's a whole nother episode, right? We as a culture and a society need to address more clearly and more holistically what our attitude and opinion and belief is on that whole thing. Because leaving it to just sort of be its own experiment in chaos is not necessarily the most humane thing for everybody involved, including those who just passively sit at home and consume it as fodder. But that's, like I said, a whole nother episode. The incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, neither in fictional life nor in real life, I need to declare this, has ever attempted to be a professional porn actor in any way, shape, or form. Although I might choose to write something like that, because that's where the ideas come. I usually in conversation with others, it's when they come the brightest and the most intensely. Anyways, I need to jot that down. And what he does do is dabble in alternative spiritual practices, and most, especially those that are from older and more ignored corners of history or regions of human experience. They recognize the duality we all somewhat are aware of the objective is to return to non-duality somehow. And in practicing that, even here in the world of duality, we can achieve some healing and some progress as we traverse through space-time to get towards non-duality. But there's a whole host of traditions that recognize the duality and the pragmatic sort of relationship between yin and yang, between light and dark. And there's all kinds of interpretations about how a human being can either utilize both or either side as energy tools or as spiritual tools, or as lifestyle tools. And there's a lot of, ways to frame that exploration. So that's the thematic heart of the sort of adventures of a young Mr. Zeppo. But as he slowly comes to realize that he's surrounding himself with all of the ego traps of ego, because he, despite his virtuous intent, has missed the point and is on the wrong path, etc., etc. And he has to have a self-awakening that the calling is that deep, that tricky, that the ego trap, tightrope walk, decision-making process, the learning process is that complex. It isn't just saying, okay, I'm smarter than the universe and I will do this. We have to really deeply, sometimes painfully, learn our lessons, and that the teachings are not a straight path, they're a spiral path. Therefore, themes will be repeated. Maybe excessively so, until the lesson is really deeply learned. And that's, of course, a big theme in this character, because he grows up to be in his adult, re-expression of this notion. Instead of being a jet-setting, public, I'm a rich guy that does a lot of cool public works, he does this time where he goes into the dark side stuff, and he tries to sort of get into the corporate war profiteering racket deeper because of backstory stuff there. The oligarch, of course, that mysteriously chose for some reason to take in young Mr. Zeppo when he was in need of adoption, and set him on his very conflicted path, and pretends ignorance to any of Mr. Zeppo's sort of spiritual adventuring or spiritual experimentation, is of course deeply in on everything, and is only really truly carrying on the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo's actual, true genetic biological father's intent, because nothing is as it seems, even in the scale that you zoom out. So there's lots of layers there, and I don't want to give too much away because I need to really seriously focus on that and drafting up better chapters than what I have now, because I just have mock-up stuff. Anyways, so leading up to the cliffhanger in 0 Hour, which is arguably supposed to be the book that I'm focusing on now, which ends in a cliffhanger, and it's the one I'm supposed to finish first, in theory, according to some attempt at scheduling this craziness, a year ago, which makes me laugh and makes me a little bit sad. Zeppo kind of grows up and thinks he's learned his lesson and hasn't, and builds a device that's supposed to... He builds several devices that tap into spiritual energy to try to, manipulate people in such a way as to exorcise their bloodlust. His thesis is, and I'm giving away a big, deep secret about the books that I guess only podcasting fans who haven't read the books yet will be aware of. And I say this at a point where none of them are, they're all in the rough draft phase and very early stages. It's not like anything has been complete. They are being hosted on Wattpad for the purposes of beta audience collaboration. If you're down to read a book that's not been finished yet and give your feedback as it is developed by the author, I humbly invite you to check out this work. So Zeppo and his path leading up to the creation of these devices, where he's sort of chosen to play the role of apparent bad guy. He gets labeled, and they've already sort of taken this. I wanted it to be a bit like Superman from the comic books, and they've already made this movie, but I guess it'll be its own thing in its own way. I guess the mindfuck is that forever and forever he sort of is the bad guy. And I guess we're sort of seeing the backstory stuff is framed as the audience is seeing the painful fall of the virtuous young child into the bad guy's thing. But along the way, we're supposed to be given as audience sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge hints and clues that in fact this character might be on a double agent, quadruple agency sort of mindfucky thing, but I don't want to give it away too much. At any rate, he fails at the climax of 0 Hour. The confluence of his energy, spiritual energy device systems that he thinks is going to be able to manipulate people into having some sort of cathartic breakdown, and therefore, in a deeply amplified way, potentially, go through the like a very fast-paced process of true deep catharsis, which is the first sort of breaking of the seal. Once one understands where the door is, you can break the seal. So I want to kind of step out of the fictional backstory telling and relate to what does that sort of nonsense have anything to do with real life? The trials and tribulations of Mr. Zeppo is based on my understanding, my amateur research and understanding of the universe based on everything I've read and studied in nonfiction. In other words, the world I'm trying to create, while extreme and bizarre and very, comic book, superhero-esque, is meant to be symbolic of things that I understand to be real and just hidden from us now, or oppressed from us now. There are ways to tap into the human energy network, the species-wide network of higher frequency energies above those which we are normally sort of conditioned to consider being real. So for all of that to make sense, I think I need to take a big step back and give you guys some real life personal backstory. And most of these following details will be included in the fictional backstory of Mr. Zeppo, by the way. So there's a lot of crossover, which is what makes it fun. It's a fun meta story that's it's not autobiographical because I have not in any way, shape, or form been raised by a powerful oligarch with interests, semi-hidden interests in the military-industrial complex. At least I don't believe so. In terms of my understanding, my parents were much more mundane in their position in corporate world. At any rate, and I don't mean that as a dismissal. I just mean they weren't, we weren't rich and we weren't tied to powerful corporations that influenced the world at that level. Although I guess in a way we were, because we were in some middle ground. All right. I myself, as a real human being, was born in Mexico City to two accountants, one of which was working at the time for a brewery that brewed one of the Mexican, the top-ranking Mexican beers, several of them. There's two big breweries that compete with each other, that sort of own all the labels. There are other breweries, I'm sure, too, but the two that sort of are the top dogs. My dad was sort of an accountant amongst an army of accountants for one of them. And he rose to such a position that he was selected to be the chief financial officer for a relatively small-sized company. So this is technically a big-sounding international corporation. You know, all alcohol companies sort of sound like that, but this is a relatively smaller-sized company. And the company that was established here in California to do the importing-exporting was, you know, a dedicated import-export, relatively small. It wasn't huge. But it definitely was, you know, an expression of the corporate world. So we moved here when I was young, exactly as you're supposed to, through the assistance of a corporation that needs you and wants you for your expertise at a particular given job. My dad was the right guy because he understood the business matters and you know, of everything of this corporation back home, and he understood and, you know, quickly studied up on anything he didn't, everything about American culture and all that. But that beer had always traveled up here before, so he understood both sides of the systems involved in either country, and therefore, I was about 4 when I moved here and was not forced to, but, you know, sort of had to by necessity, learn a new language at a time when most people don't, because they don't teach us languages early when it's easier for us to learn them. They teach us language late in our learning curve life cycle when it's a lot harder for us to learn them. So that's something that, you know, Zeppo goes through. Because of his wealth, he can speak, you know, tons of languages. Because of his training into magical or occult or spiritual, you know, tribal sort of things that release superpowers in him, he can speak any human language because he can understand what's going on in a person's mind. That's really key. He achieves a sort of high order, like Jedi mind trick level of magic in this world that this book is creating. Why does he do that? For 2 reasons. Like, storytelling wise, I feel strongly that all things are polemic. All things are dichotomous in nature, in reality. And in the culture of fiction, at whatever level, whether it's a comic book or that's, you know, a grand novel, we generally always have this dichotomy of the hero and the villain. And we sort of forget that even in a traditional hero-villain, there's almost always sort of like an anti-hero floating around in there. It's someone who betrays one side or the other, a sort of Judas. And that's important. And anyways, I just want to honor the various storytelling traditions and remix them and reintegrate them for me, and you know, for my own telling of a story. Stepping back to my personal life. My real life. I was raised under one particular spiritual tradition in a sort of relaxed and groovy kind of way. Like, we were Christmas and Easter types in the Catholic Church. And it didn't take me very long, and it didn't take me from very young. I didn't have to wait too late into life before I started really questioning what they were trying to teach me, especially vis-a-vis comparing it to, like, other historical writings, historical books about the facts and history of the church from non-church sources, and maybe with a little bit of critical dissent bias, but still based on fact and not dictated by dogma or belief structure or any of the apologist denial tactics that an organization that has influenced the world as severely as religion has. And from, as early as the age of 9, I was already deeply dubious and doubtful that they were teaching us the truth, and ready and willing to explore alternatives. So I want to heighten that in Zeppo's fictional backstory by, giving him this setting where he has all this leverage of wealth to pursue whatever he wants, and just a massive brain. He's a brainiac, and a sort of genius individual. So from an even earlier age, from the moment he achieves his like capacities to read and write and all that, a little bit ahead of the curve, this kid role models simultaneously sort of action hero James Bond types that are very pragmatically intelligent in all kinds of situations. He aspires to that sort of thing, and physically capable in all kinds of situations. But he also loves the academics, like the Q, who's sort of the symbol there for like the studious ones that are really nerdy and geeky and know everything and have read everything and have just looked into every topic. And so he, as a young person, makes those two things the things that drive his consumerism and his general sort of life choices, as opposed to anything else. Any other motives. And he has a very keen sense from very early on of doing it all truly and genuinely in service of others and not for his own gain, because of this strange upbringing that's got a lot of layered sort of indoctrination, some might say, or liberations, others might say. So what is all this based on? It's this. In real life, after many years of reading and exploring and journaling and meditating and praying and not praying and choosing what I do and do not believe in very carefully and very scientifically as one can be about belief structures. And by that I mean I would investigate a particular sort of belief idea deeply before choosing to believe in it, and deciding whether or not I would believe in it only after taking a brief period of time to rehearse believing it, to choose to say in my mind as a mantra, one might say I was doing it. I don't think I was choosing to think of it as mantra, but I was very mantra-like about it. I believe that this is the case, and I accept it as my belief that it is true. And what's fascinating is that I learned early on that belief itself has power to make things feel real. So that helped me sort of that helped me, and in theory is being established as a kind of storytelling metastructure that helps Zeppo throughout his spirally journey of failure, is that he's sort of got to transcend his own ego, obviously, as we all do in all cases, and really sort of in-tune himself after acquiring whatever tools he needed to acquire, because that is in service of self. No matter how much you dedicate it to the service of other, you ultimately have to abdicate all of it, right, in order to be truly in service of other. He's got to fail on top of that, because he's sort of a clown by archetype, a clown inspired by real-life mad genius clown technique that I was very blessed to be coached in, be taught in, by the guy who was developing it himself. He was developing his own sort of postmodern clowning technique, which I would argue one could interpret as a hybridization of a couple of different theater techniques from back in the day, particularly commedia dell'arte style mask performance, and a sort of body spiritual-esque energy improv body work sort of technique, both of whom I'm sure had titles and authors that I meant to be able to reference that now are not currently existing in my mind. But I'm trying to weave all this back together to the main theme of looking within. The purpose of this podcast and the purpose of the books of the works of fiction that I'm working on are actually very similar. And that's to speak openly, under whatever excuse I can use, about that which I can point any human being to and invite them to investigate, which I suggest and argue many of us have had the opportunity to be pointed to help. There's a tradition, there's a lineage of helping others to remember that which they have forgotten. And there are some truths about the universe that are undebunkable. There are some things about the universe that plenty of people are really interestingly arguing about. And I won't jump into that. I've already had a whole episode about flat Earth versus round Earth argumentation. But there are things in the universe that no matter how much you can try to argue it, you ultimately have to just give up and go, well, it still sort of can't be denied as true. Especially once you achieve a sort of deep comprehension of what is meant by, or what is being expressed. One of those things, let's call it a pillar of cosmic truth, is the following. And it's what I'm trying to get at, what I'm trying to encourage people to be drawn towards in themselves. True change, true healing, true revolution happens within oneself, deep within the mind, behind the mind. So inside the self that it is not contained anymore by the mind, especially not the typical mind that we think of on our day-to-day mundane basis here in this postmodern society. In order to transcend our real-life dilemma, both as individuals, whatever's going on in your life, and as communities, whatever's going on in your city and or county, whatever's going on in the jail cells near your, the ones that the prisons that represent those who have been captured and housed in boxes from your area, at the statewide level, at the national level, at the global level. It's all deeply interconnected. As many Buddha-attributed quotes like to point out, it all begins inside of you. Yes, you. And this no revolution will succeed in achieving true liberty, true freedom of the human species, both in pragmatic terms and in spiritual terms, unless it has the momentum and the spiritual power behind it of the inner mind, mental revolution that liberates the individual from its own mind. This can be indicated as having historically been repeated throughout time as a message from all those who are recognized now as spiritual teachers or prophets. I can argue that as an individual observing human behavior as sincerely and as non-judgmentally as possible for quite some time, I find that the foremost reason that people say that they cannot do a thing, anything, whatever that thing may be, that they cannot change a parameter in their life, that they cannot improve themselves in some form or another, that they cannot heal a broken relationship that is part of their network of relationships, that they cannot better themselves past a certain limit, that they cannot give the gift that they want to give to a loved one. Whatever those limitations are, whatever it is that whenever anyone said that to me, and I've invited them to explain it deeply in its fullest sense, it has been a self-denial of grace, a self-denial of access to the divine, a self-denial of self-liberation. And in my humble opinion, the simplicity of our opening up is so organic. In other words, the thing that I'm pointing to, that many others are pointing to, from arguably from Alan Watts to Peter Brook to Eckhart Tolle to Ram Dass to all these guys to Moji, and these are just the guys I've come across. And women, and men and women, brothers and sisters in the human race, the human species. The thing we are pointing to, the door, the secret, the access point to your own mental liberation that empowers you to heal yourself through the deeper and more clear understanding of your own self. It cannot be taught any further than to say, here are some tools that help you explore your own internal world. Beyond that, the internal world that resides within you needs to open up and sort of welcome you into yourself like an unfolding, literally, it's why they picked the symbol like an unfolding lotus flower with many petals. The inner journey is one of learning how to loosen up one's own restrictions as to what can and cannot be, and understand that it is our ego that has been making those decisions. Our ego and our id and our inner child, all of which are mind constructs, body-mind constructs. They're systems developed out of need and necessity in order to survive in this state of individuation in the body flesh, but that are not source. They themselves are not the origin of your experience of being. They themselves, ego, mind, id mind, whatever other labels from either from Freudian or post-Freudian, psychotherapy type lingo you want to use. There are many actually that have, some of which remain unnamed in postmodern psychoanalytics, and that have been identified by ancient mystics by various labels. The mind itself has many facets. The physical body mind that generates its experiential constructs. It has many facets because it is itself a reflection of the cosmic fractal. And a fractal always has many facets. The lesson that we're learning is to not allow the revolution that we're facing, that we've always faced in every age, in every generation, where there's ever been a societal development that got so far and then needed collapsing or self-destructing or falling apart. The lesson that we face is, and forever shall be, do we choose to allow the body-mind facets, the body-mind constructs, the base urges to continue to be in charge of our choice-making, of our planning, of our collaboration, of the way we define our societies? Or do we heal those aspects of us at the individual and species-wide level and advance, learn how to use the higher order functions of ourselves that we've stupidly been ignoring for so long, for whatever reasons, being profiteering and the addiction to ego itself. It's the question every addict has to ask. Do I keep getting by, going through my life with this relationship to this substance or this process or this activity? Or do I abandon it to see what blessings I receive next, having freed up my time, my energy, and my space from that activity? we can keep denying ourselves the gift or the tools that come next. But they're awesome tools. And so I want to, inspired by mystic teachings and ancient writings, and of course the sort of mythos from many cultures that have developed around and from the traditions that lean towards the transcendental or the mystic. I want to kind of create a new, interesting, and inspiring sort of form of action story about this character's attempt to bring the fight to the spiritual level vis-a-vis mind projection tools that force others to experience virtual phenomena that are not real, but they have to sort of short-term temporarily accept them as real, so he can then jar them awake through the mindfuckery of proving that some things are more real than others, and that he has influence and or control over reality at large. That reality is not that which we have conditioned ourselves to accept it to be, and that it's bigger and has more options, and that we can empower ourselves to evolve. But it all starts deep inside our little tiny individuated self, and the healing of that relationship that we have with ourselves, the many facets of ourselves. That relationship is expressed or reflected externally in symbols, other symbols in the hologram, the matrix, and it is doing so for everyone at every individuated point of consciousness. There's a fascinating thing about the universe, which I don't have time to get into now, tragically, not for this episode. But every point, this is a functional thing. I don't know that it's been proven, but it's definitely gaining acceptance in physics, last I heard. But any point in the universe can function and therefore appear to itself to be the center of the universe, because the universe is recursive and fractal in nature. Any point in the fractal, take two-dimensional fractals, image fractals that you render on a computer. Any point in that fractal can appear to be the center. You'd have to zoom far back enough to get enough context to realize that it's not. But from a certain framework, or from a certain level of zooming into the fractal, it will appear to be the center of the entire fractal, and function as such in its immediate surroundings. We do that too as individuals. It's part of our brain's operational interaction with the higher levels of energy. We're really sort of only just now breaking open. I gotta get going. Well, you're just breaking things open, folks. As always, thanks for listening. I'll be jumping back on real soon with a bit more direct talk about how you can get into that revolution in your mind yourself. And stay tuned. I intend to completely rework my meditations show. So keep an eye on that playlist for completely new original episodes there. If you enjoy listening to me ramble and you want to ask questions, email's on my profile and should be in the description of the show. Hit me up on all that social media, folks. Join the team. Help me reach more people. Help the movement grow. Let's get this revolution inside ourselves started. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness be with you.